Welcome back to episode number 41. I'm delighted to have you join us. I'm your host, Mike Badger. If you ever considered mixing your own poultry feed on farm, then this episode is your must-have primer. We cover a lot of ground from bushel weights to particle size to mixing time with answers to common questions such as locating growers, buying and storing grains. We ended up with a discussion on fish meal. There's lots of details in between, and it's a privilege for Pastured Poultry Talk to host this ad hoc call exclusively for the APA Producer Plus members. You can find out more about APA at appa.org. That's APPPA.org. And this call that you're about to hear was facilitated and made possible through a discussion on our private listserv. That's for members only. Thought the opportunity existed to bring some more detailed conversation around a particular topic about grinding feed on farm and the value of freshness and the ability to do that. That's where we're going to pick this call up. We're joined by Jeff Mattocks from the Fertrell Company, and he's going to provide his expertise on poultry feed and ingredients. If you're a longtime listener of this podcast, then you know Jeff's name pops up quite often in the course of my conversations with other producers. I highly recommend Jeff's rations, and I actively seek out feed that includes poultry nutrient balancer. I don't think I make any secrets about that. Not that there aren't good feeds out there, but I seek Fertrell-based rations whenever I can. And Jeff is an active APA contributor, and he's a board vice president. I recommend you check out more about Fertrell at fertrell.com. That's Fertrell.com. Let's jump into the call. We have Jeff Mattocks on the line, our poultry nutritionist from the Fertrell Company. And this call started, was an idea based on some conversations on the APA listserv that had the potential to go pretty deep. And Seth was actually the one who kicked it off with a simple enough question asking for some thoughts surrounding feed freshness and determining the value of feed freshness. He's thinking about doing that himself on farm and was just asking some questions. And there are several things that thoughts that spawned. Jeff had a couple responses, and so that's the short introduction. And I'll just kick it back over to Jeff and let him give a couple minute talk on his points, and then we'll take questions.
Okay, there was it seemed like a pretty good interest in talking about feed, making feed freshness, things like that. So just some key points that I wanted to touch on tonight is, it all started with Seth talking about the freshness of the feed and, in a lot of the presentations. And when I talk to people, I make the analogy of, how many people like to eat stale bread, after it's a week or 2 weeks old, and never does a hand go up in the room. And so what we have to keep in mind is as soon as we crack open any grain, particularly a carbohydrate type grain or a high fat grain, that the air or the oxygen in the air starts to oxidize not only the carbohydrates, but actually the vitamins and almost all the nutrients that are stored within that grain. So the quicker that we can actually get it into the animal from the time that we've actually processed the grain or cracked it open, the better utilized that grain is going to be. So it's important to try and minimize that time. I tell folks, not to keep feed more than 14 days, 30 at the maximum for optimum utilization. So, freshness is really, really important, and it does really pay to rotate the feed as often as you can. But what we find on the other side is a lot of the feed mills offer, a substantial discount if a person takes larger quantities because it cuts down on transportation costs. And in a lot of cases, the feed mills, their grinder mixers are actually 3 ton. So they're trying to, it costs them the same to make 1 ton of feed as it does to make 3 tons of feed in the electric bill and the manpower because they're doing a smaller batch. So that's the flip side of, why they try and talk you into taking larger quantities. So Another topic that we need to talk about is the quality of the grain. So if you go out there, and I'm happy to provide this to folks if they want a copy, but you can find it easily. If you do grain weights and measures, and you want to find out what the typical bushel weight, farmers still measure their grains in bushel weights. And that's how much grain actually fits in a bushel basket. So based on that, we can kind of tell what the quality of the grain is. So, for instance, corn, good corn is 56 pounds per bushel. Soybeans, before they get roasted, are 60 pounds per bushel. After they're roasted, they're 56. So these are important numbers to you for this reason. If the grain does not reach the average bushel weight, the grain or the crop did not grow correctly or did not mature correctly. If it did not go through its full life cycle as a plant, the nutrient values are going to be significantly less. I can safely say that, if you're 10% low, for instance, if corn is 51 instead of 56, that the carbohydrates, which is the reason you're buying the corn, is going to be 10% low. So instead of being 1,500 calories, it's probably going to be 1,350 to 1,400. So it's really important from the utilization of the animal standpoint, as well as there's not really any good deals out there as far as grains go. So it's important to know what the test weight is. The other thing that comes with low test weights is it tells us that the crop grew in a stressful condition. There's a really high likelihood that grain is going to have some type of toxin on it. When it's grown in a stressful environment, some type of mold or fungus or bacteria or other, chances are that it was growing on that grain before it was actually harvested. So you're going to have a higher likelihood of bringing toxins into the feed, which toxins by themselves will typically reduce feed digestibility by anywhere from 10 to 15%. So that means you're going to feed 10 to 15% more grain or more of whatever it is to achieve the same goal. I think it's important that once you start purchasing grains and once you find a high quality source, that you continue to utilize the same source versus shopping around, because you never know what you're going to get. When you find a good quality grower who provides you ideally what you're looking for, I think it's really important to actually contract with that grower from a year-to-year basis, saying, next year, this is what I think I'm going to need. Can you grow that for me? And even pre-negotiate the prices so that there's no surprises when that harvest comes in. These are just going to help you maintain a consistency throughout that growing or for as long as you're in business. I know at Fertrell, we implement that. I don't shop around for any of our ingredients. Once I've found a good supplier of all of my inputs, I've stayed with the same suppliers for the last 16 years. I have no plans on changing. The next point I want to touch on is particle size. If you're going to use a grinder mixer, we have to be really careful to have the right screen size in there so that our particle size, and you can take out your rulers later and take a look but we're looking for a particle size about 1/8 of an inch wide and 1/4 of an inch long. So ideally, we want really coarse feed. Powder and poultry do not get along under any circumstances. So if your feed's too powdery, that's why they turn a lot of stuff into pellets in the commercial world. It's an easy way to hide a bunch of powders and reconstitute it into a form that the chicken will eat. We don't need to do that. A mash feed will perform equally as well to a pelleted feed, provided it's of a good quality. So keep in mind, even from baby chicks all the way up through adulthood, good sized particles. It's important. It keeps the gizzard working and functioning, which is important to the entire metabolism. Roller mills are a little bit easier to work with. If you can find a roller mill to process your feed, you're going to be further ahead. Once we get the rollers set to the right gap space in the rolls, we can pretty much use that for all the grains, and you'll have a much more uniform, less powder feed. For poultry, it's ideal to use a roller mill. It's a little bit slower, but it does actually make the best feed for poultry. And then the last point that I kind of pre-thought of was mixing time. So once all the ingredients are actually into whatever the mixing vessel is going to be, each mixer is a little bit different. You should probably do some research and check with the manufacturer, but typically 5 to 7 minutes. So if you don't mix for 5 minutes, you don't get a thorough uniform mix. And if you mix for more than 7 or 8 minutes, it'll actually start unmixing itself. Okay, so there's that sweet spot in the middle there where everything is uniformly mixed, and you're going to have the best success in manufacturing your own feed. I see this a lot. Farmers turn on the grinder mixer and they just leave it, after the last grain's in there. They'll walk away, leave it running, and they'll actually unmix their feed. So when they're discharging it, all the corn or the lighter material comes out and all the heavier material comes out last. So when they're feeding it, they see a big change in the beginning of the bin and the end of the bin, and that's not good for any of our animals. Those are kind of the points that I had kind of pre-thought of. I'm sure there's questions out there. We can talk about whatever you like.
Jeff, one of the questions I had that I wrote down is you're talking about the test weights. How do you know what the test weight is? Is that something that the supplier should be testing for you, or can the farmer get that tested?
The farmer typically gets it tested because he wants to sell it. He'll know what his test weight quality is, or should know what his test weight quality is. If he doesn't, most of the larger feed mills have a little hanging scale. It kind of has a cup on one side that holds about a pint, and they'll fill that up and they'll hang it on the scale, and then they'll slide the bar across, and they have the ability of measuring the test weight that way as well. You can actually find a plastic version of a test weight scale. I believe it from eNASCO, smallenasco.com. It's a really resourceful website anyway for a lot of farmer amenities, like moisture testers, bushel weight testers, things like that. I believe the plastic one is in the $35 range. I haven't looked in a couple of years, but I've helped a couple of farmers find them in the past.
Great. Thank you. Questions?
Sure.
I have a question. This is Kathy from Idaho. And my first question is, how much should winter red wheat weigh per bushel? And then secondly, when you're storing corn, some of the people that I've talked with said that they set up some sort of an airflow system in the granary, and others say that it's not necessary. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Hi, Kathy. So red wheat, or wheat in general, actually, just because of the berry size or the grain size, the uniform number for wheat is 60. Some of the harder red wheats will go as high as 62 pounds per bushel weight. And
okay.
So on the corn question, it all depends on what the harvest moisture is. So if out in your climate, if the farmer wasn't in a rush because you're in a drier climate, if the corn goes into the bin under 13.5 or under 14% moisture, you should be perfectly fine. Some farmers rush it a little bit, and they'll harvest at 15 to 16. And in climates where you have a big temperature swing or a lot of sunlight, you can cause some of that moisture to perspire out of the grain, and it'll want to rise to the top. And what happens is you form a crust layer on the top of that bin where it gets a little bit of mold up there, which is not good. So that's where the people are saying, a little bit of air circulation in the bottom is a good thing.
Okay. And then the next question I had is, how do other people locate growers? My growers all rotate their crops, so the guy that grows red wheat one year isn't growing it the next year. And, they'll grow peas on dry land depending on how much moisture we get in the winter. And so I'm really having trouble even finding the same crops year after year.
Yeah, and it's just building a network of farmers that you can work with, and it takes time. They don't. Farmers are somewhat reclusive and like a hermit, and they don't let everybody know what they're doing, so they're hard to communicate with sometimes. But once you find them, and I don't know about Idaho, but out here, through the winter, all the farmers go somewhere and have coffee in the morning and talk about everything they did wrong last year and everything they're going to fix this year. And that's an opportune location to go, find those. Generally, it's the older farmers, 50s, 60s, which is the average age for a farmer in the United States. In the wintertime, it's easiest to find them. They'll congregate at a location. Sometimes it's near the elevator where the grain goes anyway, or, into a common, small town where they can have coffee and nobody bothers them. And that's sometimes a good place to look. Sometimes you have to start by talking to the local seed salespeople and find out kind of from them, who's growing what, and research it backwards that way. But farmers are hard to find. Even though you see farmland everywhere, trying to find the farmer sometimes is a real difficult thing to do. But it's going to be a matter of time for you, Kathy, just building a network and finding the right people in your area. I'm sure they're there. It's just, talking to them and saying, so you got a guy that's raising peas, and ask him, do you know anybody that's raising any wheat or whatever you're looking for? Usually they'll help you out and point you in the right direction.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff, one of the things that usually comes up when we're talking about the feed freshness is there's some suggestion that fresh feed will actually improve feed conversion. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
I agree with that philosophy in that, I get a lot of feedback from growers across the country, and, a lot of them are telling me the same thing. I have to buy a ton at a time, or I have to buy 3 tons at a time, or I have to buy something like that. And then when I start digging a little deeper to find out exactly how much feed did they feed to, per broiler, not everybody keeps those numbers, but the ones that do, I'm hearing a lot of numbers of close to 14, 15 pounds to make a 5-pound broiler, when it actually should only take, 10 and a half or 11 pounds. So where I see the lower numbers coming in are people that are processing their own feed or live very close to the feed manufacturer and can get it when they want to, on a fresher basis, and keep their stock rotated. So, comfortably I'm seeing anywhere from a 10 to 15% reduction in actual feed requirement or feed consumed. It's not a requirement. It's actually the amount of feed that the bird eats. And 10% as grain prices go higher, or if somebody's feeding organic or non-GMO feed, 10% is a lot of money. That's a lot of money to be leaving on the table. Just because the feed mill wants to offer you $20 a ton off, if you get 3, doesn't compensate for if you got $800 feed and, you're feeding 10% more, that's $80 a ton. So, I can run the economics on this pretty quick. Plus you have that, the birds may or may not perform as well even on the health side of things. They're not getting all the nutrients properly. Not only does the carbohydrates in the grain deplete, but the fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin A and E will also oxidize. They're very stable in their concentrated form before they go into the grain mix, but once they get dispersed into a grain mix, the shelf life is less than 30 days for a lot of those vitamins. There's a chart out there, I'd have to find it, but there's a depletion chart of once vitamins get added into a grain mix. It tells you how quickly, I think there's like 50% left after 30 days. And those vitamins are expensive, no matter how you buy them, no matter where they come from. Getting those vitamins is extremely costly. So even from a health aspect, as far as how well that bird's going to perform, when it's challenged by weather or other health obstacles, it's going to be a big difference between fresh feed and old feed.
I have another question about the feed trial that was in the April issue of Grit. The one where they're feeding two separate troughs of one was the roasted soy meal, fish meal, wheat, alfalfa meal, vitamins, and oyster shell, and then the corn in the other one. How do they mix the roasted soy and the vitamins and alfalfa meal? How did they mix those up so that the hens were not picking and choosing out of that bin?
I'm not really sure how they did that, Kathy. Now, certain breeds of chickens have a much better ability to diet self-select than others. So some of the more heritage-type breeds, if you will, seem to exhibit a much better ability to know if they need protein or know if they need a carbohydrate, or they do a little bit better than the modern, hybrid chickens that we're using out there. That would be the only, thought that I would have on that field trial. I had to talk to that person and really dig into it.
So maybe the red sex links aren't the best breed to do that with, huh?
For diet self-selection, no. But the toss-up is that they give you more eggs per hen than almost any other breed out there.
What about the chickens for the broilers? Do you think they would do well with that system?
I would think so. After they're 5 or 6 weeks old, they seem to gain a lot of intelligence all of a sudden. And I wouldn't do it in the first 3 weeks, and then I would start offering something alternative, maybe towards the end of week 4, depending on how well they're developing. Okay, make sure that they're doing okay and they haven't been challenged with anything. But you should be able to, even with the Cornish cross, we know starting week 5 that we can actually put in, for instance, whole wheat or just some cracked corn, and they have that ability to do a little bit of diet self-selection starting week 5.
Okay.
Hey, Kathy, that study was a summary of an Ann Fanatico study, so that might be a good question for her on the list. If you want to put something out there asking about how she mixed up her protein concentrate.
Yes, I'm real interested in that system. I've been doing it sort of. I put the scratch in one bin and the pellets in another, but I'm hoping to find enough grains locally to be able to grind my own soon, and just grinding the corn as opposed to mixing the whole business sounds like a much easier way to and less time consuming way to present the feed. So I was interested in this study for that reason.
Anything that we didn't cover that you guys were hoping that we would?
Has anything in studies or anybody with knowledge regarding some of these pasture mixes, that are claimed to be poultry pasture mixes with the different clover and alfalfa and rye and all that different stuff? How does that impact the feed, I guess, if I'm feeding a set protein percent of feed? How does that consumption of that pasture affect nutrition levels?
It doesn't, so what I've found over the years is the best thing to do is you continue to offer the correct balance of feed based on the stage of the poultry, the age and stage of the poultry that you're growing. And when the pasture is in a very favorable form or state, in that younger growth, say 6 inches or less, it's pretty much a balanced feed. The pasture itself is pretty much a balanced feed by itself, and they'll just reduce their overall grain consumption. That's been the best way to go at it. Every time that we've tried to, say, play with the protein a little bit and compensate for what we think we got in the pasture, It works for a little while, but we tend to hit a wall or have some failure at some point during that pasture season. But on a really well-groomed, properly managed pasture, we can see as high as a 15% feed reduction and a lot richer color in the carcasses. But the best number I've ever seen is in that 15% range. And the person who did that was actually in southwestern Kansas, and he was maintaining pure alfalfa stand at between 6 and 8 inches. So it was always in that very tender, young state when it's the easiest for poultry to consume and digest. Once it gets much over 8 inches, the lignin gets very high. The woodiness of the plant gets very high, and poultry's ability to actually extract nutrients from it starts decreasing rapidly.
Anybody else?
Yeah, it's Seth in Oklahoma. 3 questions. One is if anyone has any idea kind of on the smaller grinder mixers, the PPO requirement and horsepower.
Typically, Seth, the horsepower requirement for even the small ones is right around 30 horsepower. I haven't seen any grinder mixer that goes below a 30 horsepower requirement. And they're all pretty much set up for, I thought it was a 540 PTO speed RPMs.
Oh, that's good, because I was hoping it would go that low, because I've got a 40 something horsepower, so I'd work out there. The second question is in terms of, given how hot we get here in Oklahoma during the summer, would I need to buy the whole grain maybe twice? Once buy them in the spring and then do it again in the midsummer, or would I be okay buying one lot in and using it over the course of the season?
No, you should be fine as long as it's good storage. It doesn't have to be airtight, but it does have to be rainproof and keeps the moisture out. You want to make sure that your bin is vented, so on the hotter days, any excess moisture, if the grain decided to sweat on you, if you don't get it in the bin at, say, that 13.5%, 14% moisture, if your grain decides it wants to sweat at all, you need to have some vents on top so that moisture has a place to get out of there on the hotter days. But, typically your best time to buy is somewhere close to harvest in the fall. So when the grain is actually being harvested, a lot of guys will give you a little bit better deal. If they don't have enough storage, they'll give you a little bit better price if you can take it from them, right out of the dryer or right out of the field, so to speak. Just make sure that the moistures are right. Okay, if you take it above 15%, we're just encouraging spoilage and mold growth, and it's not going to. It's just not going to store well for you whatsoever. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is if you're going to buy small grains, particularly oats and barley for some reason go through a sweat just like hay does. So they go through this fermentation where some enzyme activity occurs right after the grain is separated from the stalk. So when you're buying new grains, it's best to have enough of a surplus to give yourself roughly, I'd say, on barley and oats, I like to have close to 20 days before you feed new crop barley. Otherwise, you can cause diarrhea in your birds, and you're going to decrease digestibility. Okay.
And I forgot my third question, so maybe
Actually, for some reason, all the grains go through some sort of a sweat after they've been detached from, whatever stalk or cob or whatever. Particularly the carbohydrate grains. It's like it triggers some enzymatic activity within the grain, and we'll notice that the temperature of the grain goes up, for a brief period. Some grains are more than others, but we've noticed it the most with barley. And, so if you buy some barley right out of the field or straight from the farmer, this is something that you want to monitor, is that temperature, and not to feed what we call green barley or feed that barley until, it's gone back down to near ambient temperatures.
So Jeff, this is Kathy again. When do you typically go talk to the farmers and try to make an agreement with them about, most of my farmers around here are selling their product to organic dairy. And when I talk with them about non-GMO or non-organic certified, especially if they're like in transition, I can buy from them for like 3 years, and then they're gone for me. They're contracted to the dairies. So, but they've offered me like the edges of the fields that are kind of weedy, or is that a good option for me, or would you not recommend that?
Well, if you could talk to them a little bit more about managing they're talking about their buffer strips. So for certified organic, they have to have a 25 to 30 foot buffer strip minimum between their field and a neighboring field. So they can't sell the buffer strip to the certified organic guys, even though they list it as though it's certified organic. So, then you pay them based on it. It depends on what the level of the weed seeds and other contamination, non-desirable stuff is in there. But some of those guys, that crop's going to be just as good as what was in the main part of the field. And that's actually a great option for you, Kathy, because you can buy that buffer strip grains for, probably about half of what they're going to sell it to the dairy for.
Ooh, that would be great.
Right. Now, if it is weedy, and if you keep your eyes open, and I'm speaking from East Coast where we have lots of farms, there are some wire rotary grain cleaners or screens. So if you got something that was too weedy, you can actually run it through there, and the weed seeds would drop out, and you would be able to keep the primary grain that you were after. And then, you burn or compost or something, the weed seeds, you want to be careful where they go to. You need to be careful because weed seeds on paper test very high in protein, but they're a lot of times a form of protein that can actually be toxic to some of our animals. So we do need to keep control of weed seeds. I don't like to see more than a 5% weed seed contamination level. Okay.
Okay.
Above that, then we have to look at alternatives.
And when do you make your contract? Do you talk to them? For instance, corn here is harvested in November. Wheat and oats and barley are harvested from the middle of August to the middle to the end of September. Alfalfa we don't have any soy. Alfalfa is usually there's 4 or 5 crops of that. So
yeah, you shouldn't have a hard time finding alfalfa, but
no.
like I said earlier, right about a month before planting season. So I don't know. You guys probably plant, by the 15th of May, I'm guessing, in your neck of the woods. So,
yeah, this year they're planted the 15th of April. If you can believe it. Everything's been so warm and so early this year that there are fields that are that were planted the first through the 15th of April.
That's awful early for you guys, but that's that's great that they got in. And then once all the fields are planted and they're done with their first or second round of cultivation, if they do cultivation, you can also try and find them in the middle of the growing season when there's not quite as much to do. But the key times are usually a month before planting, and then or really any time through the winter is a good time to strike up a conversation with them. And then you can also catch them about a month before harvest. Those are probably the 2 best windows to talk to them. But like I said, once you make inroads with a few of them, just try and keep those guys, so that they'll supply you on an annual basis.
Great.
I have another question. Are all fish meal sources created equal?
No, not at all.
Okay. There's a mill up the road that he carries fish meal, and it's 63%. So anyway, I was curious about that.
Well, if it's 63%, it has to be one of the better fishes. So it's either herring meal, sardine meal, But it could even be salmon meal. That's the only thing you'd want to worry about is it farm-raised salmon. So, it usually will tell you what kind of fish it is. And, but when you get above 60%, usually those fish meals are perfectly fine for poultry and swine. The ones I worry about are the ones that are down below 55, because they're almost always coming from catfish, commercial catfish farms out of the south. And that's some pretty ugly stuff. And the amino acid profile of the catfish meal or the amino acid profile of fish that are being farm raised because their diets contain a lot of corn and soy anyway is not really that good. And we also find that the ash is too high, which means the digestibility as a whole is considerably lower. So, the intelligent question to ask about fish meal is what kind of fish is it? What's the ash content? Because if the ash is much over 12 or 13, every percent over that is probably a percent less digestible. So, just ask a couple more questions. But I would think that as long as it's over 60%, that it's probably one of the more premium type fish meals.
Okay.
We raise a lot of trout here. What is that a good one or a bad one?
Well, the trout diet is about half fish meal, and then the other half is soybean meal and corn. So it's on the fence as far as being a good one. But usually in the trout world, like where you are, Kathy, is you really can only get the fish meal after the fillet has been removed. So then you're getting a lot more bone and a lot less meat. So a lot of times the protein won't make 60%. Or the other way to know is, the calcium level is going to be a little bit out of balance. And I'm not saying we can't use those, but we need a good analysis of what you have to know how to figure it in. But it's not worth the same value as a whole fish meal. Because a lot of times you have to feed nearly twice as much.
Some people don't want to use fish meal of any kind. What are the options then if you're trying to substitute for it?
It just depends on, your moral compass. So there are still some people using meat and bone meal from commercial stock, coming out of the large rendering houses. There's still some people using things like blood meal and feather meal to feed their chickens. And if you don't want to use any type of a meat product, because everybody's kind of chasing after that vegetarian fed, then you have to have the ability to increase your amino acids. So in that type of diet, we have to be able to supplement with a little bit more lysine and as well as a little bit more methionine, which is the first limiting amino acid for poultry. Now, in the organic world, we are very limited on how much methionine we can add. So that's where fish meal gives us a definite advantage, because fish meal is the only meat type protein that the organic world has, or the organic community has accepted for poultry production. So it gives us a lot more flexibility on those limiting amino acids like methionine, cysteine, and lysine. But we can make a ration. The big guys, the Tysons and the Purdues of the world, they're not feeding, fish meal because in their world it's not cost effective, and they can use all the synthetic amino acids that they want.
Right. I don't want to necessarily make this all about fish meal, but so there's one, if I'm remembering right, there's some welfare programs that don't allow fish meal or animal byproducts in their feeds. Is that true?
Yeah, in fact, a lot of them, some of the GAP certification doesn't allow fish meal at this time. AWA, Animal Welfare Approved, didn't allow, but they will allow meat products that are from human food stream. So, and with, the right antioxidants. So they're actually allowing catfish meal. They allowed crab meal, after the crab meat's been removed, the remaining entrails and meat that hasn't been picked. And the fish meals like sardine meal, which is what we have, and So as long as it's a human food chain fish, they seem to be allowing that, but they are not allowing things like menhaden and fish that are only being harvested and sometimes over-harvested purely for animal feeds.
That'll conclude this episode of Pastured Poultry Talk. I'd like to extend a big thank you to the APA members who jumped on this call and participated, who asked questions, and those who just kind of hung out in the background and listened. And most of all, thank you to Jeff Mattocks of the Fertrell Company for providing his valuable insight. Don't forget that you can find all of the Pastured Poultry Talk episodes at pasturedpoultrytalk.com. And if you want to sound off and talk about this episode or any of the previous ones, we have a new Facebook group called Pastured Poultry Talk. Find it, join it, and let's chat.